Is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Government Contracting Cyber Summit presented by Federal Publication Seminars and Neil Systems Corporation. Neil Systems, we want to thank you for helping put this all together. Today we got a full schedule, so we're starting 9 a.m. here and we'll run all the way through till about 4 p.m. Just a couple of housekeeping items from Federal Publication Seminars. You should have received two links, one for a morning session, one for the afternoon session. So we'll go for a little while, take a break, and then end this morning session at 12 o'clock Eastern. And then we'll pick up again with the afternoon, the PM session at 1 p.m. We got a full schedule of calendar information. I want to join my co-host Elizabeth. Introduce my co-host Elizabeth Yemenez from Neil Systems, and we're going to go through the agenda. Do you want to start us with the agenda, Elizabeth? Talk through it.
Sure. Let me just actually pull that up. I have it on a different screen here. So I think we're going to get started this morning with our plenary session with Laura Christ of Bloomberg Gov. She's a federal market analyst, and we're delighted to hear from her momentarily. We're going to follow that at 10 a.m. with the Cmmc panel. And then at 11 a.m., do you have that open, Todd? Remind me who's going at 11?
I do DFARS and to Cmmc Interim Rule and Implementation Program.
That's right. From 11, and then I believe after that we have a lunch break.
Yep.
And then we'll have from 1 to 1:15 a quick fireside chat with video. That should be pretty exciting. Followed by a legal framework of cybersecurity with RJO, Jeff Chiao, and then that will be followed by the cyber insurance panel. That's a fireside chat too, I believe.
Yes.
Is there a break in the afternoon?
We'll have a break sometime, yes. We'll break, okay. And then we get into session number 7, which is the cyber warfare, which I think will be very interesting.
That will be very interesting, yeah. And then it'll be closing at 4. That's a full day. So
I've had a chance to talk to Casey Fleming, fantastic guy with the Black Ops group. So looking forward to hearing what and the panelists are great. So we're looking forward to seeing that to wrap it up the day. Also, just a reminder, we are going to be applying for CLE and CPE credits for this program. So I do have polling questions throughout the day in order to allow for licensing for accountants and attorneys. You need to do this, show that you're active in the program. That way we do the polling questions. Polling questions really don't mean anything. It gives us a little bit of information, but they're more fun than anything else. And I will be asking throughout the programs those polling questions. So please participate in those. You will get a certificate of attendance as well. We'll try to get those everything awarded by the end of the year for you. I know that some of the accreditation panels and things like that, even though they may not show up, they are working hard to try to get that out with cybersecurity, with the COVID and everything else going on. It's end of the year. It's a little bit more difficult for them to go through and get that awarded in time, but we'll do our best. So let's first of all kick off with our first panel, which is Laura Christ from Bloomberg Government. Before we introduce Laura, Elizabeth, I'm going to go through a polling question, and then we will, if you want to introduce Laura, that'd be great. So first polling question comes up. How many years experience do you have in the cybersecurity related field? You can't vote for some reason. You can't push a little radio button. Just answer within the questions link, and that will show that you're active within the program. I will give you another 5 seconds and we'll close the poll. All right, closing the poll. So we got 58% of our audience is 1 to 3 years, 21% less than a year, 16% 7 or plus 7 years in cybersecurity. So Very good. Good diverse audience. All right. Elizabeth, you want to introduce Laura?
Yes, I'd be delighted to. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Laura Christ, who's a federal market analyst with Bloomberg Gov. She's been part of our program for the last couple of years, I think the last 4 years, minus last year on maternity leave. And so we're always grateful to hear your insights about government spending in the cybersecurity and defense area. So without further ado, let's take it away.
Perfect, thank you so much. I'm going to try to share my screen here. Let's see if I can get rid of that. Okay.
Yep, we see it. You're good.
Okay, and you don't see the session stuff, the GoToWebinar?
Nope.
Okay, perfect. All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. This is my 3rd year doing this. As Elizabeth said, I always enjoy giving this presentation to this audience and working with Neosystems, so thank you guys. I have been with BGov for about 4.5 years, and I'm a federal market analyst, and I focus on information technology with a little bit of an emphasis in cybersecurity. And I am going to talk to you all today about, whoa, what's going on there? Sorry, guys. Let's see. So let's start over. Does that work? Perfect. I'm going to talk to you all today about, start out talking a little bit about the cybersecurity budget request for fiscal 2021, just to give a little bit of context on the spending. Not a whole lot of information that I want to share there because there's not a ton of information about the cybersecurity budget, but there's a little bit that I want to share with you all. And then I'll talk about contract spending and focus on fiscal 2019 as a historical look back because that's the last full year of data that we have. You'll notice that we do talk about 2020 quite a bit because we're getting close to having all of the data for fiscal 2020. The reason that we don't currently is because DoD reports on a 90-day lag for national security reasons. So we like to look at 2019 because it's a full year of data, but we will talk about 2020, what we expect that to look like, and then a little bit of a look ahead for this fiscal year with some projections and some opportunities is what we'll end with. Talk about what opportunities we expect to be big for cybersecurity this year and what we're tracking. All right, so we'll get started with the budget. So this year's budget for fiscal 2021 is the highest budget request that we've ever had at $18.8 billion. If you look at the picture there on the left, you'll see that the projected amount for fiscal 2020 was $18.8 billion as well. So you might ask yourself, that doesn't seem like a record. But if we're comparing that blue bar, that's the request. It is quite a bit higher. And it's nice to compare those bars because we will, in the next few months, see a cybersecurity budget for fiscal 2022. And we at BGov are expecting that gray bar to be higher than 18.8 because each year it seems like, as you can see here, doesn't seem like it is true that from the budget request to the projected amounts, you see a pretty nice jump up there. So we're expecting a cyber budget for 2021 to be over $19 billion. And because of national security reasons, DoD does leave out some of their cybersecurity budget, so we do think it would be even larger than that. And obviously this is just the unclassified portion, so the classified portion would increase it even more. And so, we're just looking at a smaller portion of the budget here, but this is still quite a large budget that we're looking at. And so I just wanted to also mention that the defense budget is in that blue bar is 9.8 billion of that, and then civilian agencies is 8.9 billion. So pretty close to half and half, but defense does make up a larger portion of that cyber budget. And then I was saying on the executive summary slide that the cyber budget doesn't have a ton of detail. It actually used to have more, but each year it seems like we get less and less. This is pretty much what we were able to get out of the cybersecurity budget for 2021. Basically top line numbers for each agency, and then a little bit of information about where they might spend that money based on the Nist framework. So in the past, we've had bureaus and even offices. This year, we just had the top line agency numbers. And I'll talk a little bit about some different areas where you might be able to find more budget details, but I'm not going to focus too much on that since we want to talk mostly about spending here. But I did want to mention on this slide that the two areas that I thought were interesting as far as a Nist framework goes are the respond area, because there's such a big bump up on responding to cybersecurity or cyber attacks is what I'm expecting that to be. More of a response look is where most of the money is coming in. A little bit surprising to me that that's where more of the money is going rather than putting it into the identify and protect, because now those are kind of aligning with each other, all in the $2+ billion range. But that's just something to note, that a lot more money is going into the response section. And then I also just wanted to mention that a little more money, about $200 million, is going into the identify portion of the budget. So I think this is something actually to keep an eye on and to see whether or not more money goes into response moving forward, or if they're just trying to kind of even that out because they realize that not quite enough money was being spent there. In this slide, all of these top cybersecurity programs are coming from the IT budget rather than the cybersecurity budget. And this is one of the areas where we can actually find a little bit more information about where agencies are planning to spend money on cybersecurity in fiscal 2021. You'll notice that most of these, if not all of them, there's a DoD one toward the bottom. These are mostly civilian agency programs in the top programs, and we expect that's because a lot of the cybersecurity programs with DoD are going to be national security programs that they're not reporting through the IT budget. So I just wanted to let you guys know that is the case, but there is tons of money being spent through DoD. It's just not available in the IT budget to explain exactly where that's going. One place where you could find that is DoD does report more information through an IT budget, usually a little later in the year than when they release the IT budget as a whole across the federal government. But there is a little bit more information about that broken out by bureau. It's just not at this level of detail where you would be able to see individual programs. So we actually found these using a keyword search in a dashboard that we've built for the IT budget to pull out things that mention cybersecurity, IT security, information assurance, and pulled out the top programs based on that. So there are probably many more that are high value, but these are the ones that we were able to pull out based on those keywords, looking at titles and descriptions of the programs, because these aren't available in the cybersecurity budget itself. And with that, I'm going to move on to contract spending. We'll talk a lot about different agencies, the top contracts, the top contractors, the small business share, and we'll end with some opportunities to look at. All right, so I want to start out just by explaining how we define the cybersecurity market at BGov. So we have a tool called the Contracts Intelligence Tool that brings in historical transactions that are reported by the federal government. And using a search function, it's pretty advanced because it's not just keywords. We're able to create markets. And so the cybersecurity market, we have a full cybersecurity market, and then 5 submarkets that you can see there over on the right-hand side that all go into the cybersecurity market. And we create these with a combination of keywords, specific contracts or task orders that we know to be cybersecurity contracts or task orders. We narrow by NAICS and PSCs, and we exclude things that we don't think are important. If you just look at cybersecurity, you might get chairs or other unrelated things that are in a cybersecurity office, for example. We do not include that. So we get rid of that non-technical spending. We also aren't able to have, we don't have access to classified contracts or most intelligence community contracts, so those would not be included either. But what this does include is contracts and task orders and individual transactions on a contract or task order that show up for all of those different search criteria for cybersecurity as a whole, for network operations, insider threat, and the IT side of biometrics, not so much the big equipment that they might need in say an airport that doesn't have much of an IT aspect to it. That would not be included. Information security and information assurance. And you can see here the fiscal 2019 values for all of those markets. Cybersecurity as a whole is close to $9 billion in fiscal 2019. And then all of these markets together account for probably about half of that. You might ask, what is all of that other stuff? It probably, some of it probably does belong in some of these other buckets. The problem is that the way that things are reported by the federal government, we can't figure out exactly where it should sit. It might just say cybersecurity, so we might not know exactly where it goes, or it might be something that doesn't perfectly fit into any of these buckets, or maybe fits into all of them. So we don't know exactly, or most of them, so we don't know exactly where to put it. We don't want to put it in all of them because it's not very specific toward one, so we just keep it in the broader cybersecurity bucket. But these markets are constantly evolving and being added to as agencies report more spending. And so this is a type of thing that we constantly are keeping an eye on and updating and making sure it's in good shape for presentations like this and for our clients. So with that, I wanted to give you a lot of that background information because the remaining slides are all going to be based on how we've built this market. So this is a top line look at civilian agencies and the Defense Department from 2015 to 2020. And then that little gray bar at the top of 2020 is our projection for what the Defense Department has not reported yet, because we still have about 6 weeks left until we're going to have all of their obligations reported. And then the last fiscal 2021 bar doesn't include any of the money that's been reported yet because it's not very much. Instead, we're just giving a projection here. But based on our projection, we're expecting peak levels in the cybersecurity market. Every year, the amount of money spent on cybersecurity has increased since fiscal 2015. And we are expecting that trend to continue. There's no reason to expect that not to be the case. The budget's increasing every year. The amount of money that agencies spend increases, so we expect that to continue. And we think that will be a decent bump up for both civilian agencies and the Defense Department. The interesting thing that we found is that the Pentagon's share of the market has increased almost every year since fiscal 2015. It was almost 50-50 back in 2015, and now we're getting closer to 55-60% of the cybersecurity spending is by the Defense Department. I don't think that can keep up forever because the budget has to be able to keep up with that. But I do think it's interesting that the Defense Department has been spending so much more each year on cybersecurity. So I do think that is a market that's growing even faster, specifically looking at defense cybersecurity rather than cybersecurity as a whole. And then here's a look at just the civilian agencies. These ones, the top agencies are Homeland Security, Health and Human Services, NASA, State, and Social Security. And those are the top agencies by fiscal 2020. And that data is pretty much complete. We might see some fluctuations in there over the next couple months just because sometimes agencies get behind on reporting, but that should be pretty close to correct for the civilian agencies. And typically, you would see Veterans Affairs in the top 5 here. But Social Security actually surpassed VA because of the Logistics Management System contract. And I don't know whether that will continue, but I just wanted to mention that because VA is another agency that is typically one of the top ones and is important when it comes to cybersecurity spending, especially if you're a small business. That's probably between Homeland Security and Veterans Affairs are going to be the 2 agencies that would probably be the ones to look at if you're trying to kind of break into the market. And the last thing I wanted to say is that these 5 agencies accounted for over half of the cyber spending in fiscal 2020. And so again, if you're looking at, breaking into the market, what agencies are spending the most money, it's going to be these 5 plus VA are going to be the ones that you would want to focus on, probably trying to make those relationships in the civilian space. And then here's a look at the Pentagon spending broken down by the different parts of the military, and then also the defense-wide piece. So that's going to include like DHA, DISA, and all of the other fourth estate offices. And we lumped all of those together because it kind of is a similar amount of money being spent there as the different military branches. So the Air Force and defense-wide pieces are the parts that are growing the quickest. And when I looked into why that might be the case, it didn't seem like it was actually on any one big contract, which I think is actually good news. They're just really expanding the amount of money that they spend on cybersecurity across the board. They're not just saying, oh, we need to invest in this one thing. They're investing in a lot of different areas. So I think this is a good clue into the market that it's really healthy and expanding and a really good place to be if you're a contractor. And we do expect obligations to increase by close to $1 billion from fiscal 2019 to 2021. I'm sorry, I think there's a typo on there. I can fix that and resend out the slides. We're expecting a pretty big bump up, a smaller one from 2019 to 2020, but then a bigger one kind of moving forward into fiscal 2021. And then this is a look at the top contracts in fiscal 2020. So this won't include everything from DoD, but as you can see there in that top agencies bracket, DoD does make up, or DoD's shows up in a lot of these contracts. So the contracts that are here in the top contracts are probably going to be similar, but those obligations on the right-hand side would likely increase as DoD finishes up reporting its fiscal 2020 data. So the things I just wanted to mention on this slide, I'm going to take a look at my notes because I can't see the whole slide here. So we're looking at mostly large and multiple award contracts here. This is not super surprising. Because cybersecurity is such a large market, this overlaps quite a bit with the contracts that you would see just as the top IT contracts, just with more of a focus on security. So you see you know, IT70 on there, and Soup, which obviously, you know, lots and lots of different IT services and products are being bought through those contracts, but they're also the top contracts for cybersecurity as well. You'll also notice that DoD uses many of these contracts where other agencies are just showing up in a couple. So for example, Homeland Security is showing up with IT70 there. Oh, and I should mention, some of these, like IT70, these are not all of the agencies that are spending money for cybersecurity on this contract. Same with Soup. These are just the top ones. But if you see only one agency listed there, that is either the only agency or they are so predominantly spending on that compared to anybody else that I only listed one. So you can kind of take that as that's pretty much the only agency spending on that contract for cybersecurity. But for the top two and the cybersecurity technical area contract, there are likely other, and 8A stars and OASIS. There are going to be other agencies there spending money, but these are just the ones that are spending the most money on cybersecurity here. But what I was going to say about Homeland Security is that IT70 is the only contract that they are showing up on in these top 10. So that's going to be their predominant contract for cybersecurity. They also, if Alliant showed up on this list, Alliant would be listed there as well. But it is showing up as the one that they are spending a decent amount of money on. That's the same for VA. Between Soup and IT70, that's where they're spending most of their cybersecurity money, or at least a good portion. I guess it's probably not necessarily half, since we were only looking at the top 10 contracts here, but I just think this is a helpful way to look at if I wanted to be on a contract vehicle to kind of break into the cybersecurity market, or just be able to have more access to the different contracts that are coming out, or task orders. Soup and IT70 are two good ones because there are a bunch of different agencies using them for this market. And then this is a look at the top cybersecurity contractors in the market here. Booz Allen Hamilton is showing up here on the top. A big reason for that is because of their work with DHS's Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program. But the top 10 contractors are only accounting for about a little more than a third of the cybersecurity market. And this is a nice thing to know. You might think 38% is kind of a lot. There are some markets where the top 10 contractors account for 90% of the market. This is coming in mostly kind of more in the defense space when we're talking about maybe aerospace, where the big defense contractors make up a huge percentage of the market. But cybersecurity is different. Cybersecurity, because it spans so many different areas and needs so many different types of expertise, a lot of different types of contractors are needed. And it's a great market as far as being a new contractor and being able to offer kind of different niche things, because so many different types of products and services are needed. So 38% is actually quite a low number. It's a great market as far as being competitive goes. The top contractors, this is what I was saying. It's a combination of IT and professional services firms. There are also some R&D firms in the cybersecurity market, because since there are always new products and services needed, new threats, new ways to think about defending systems and networks, there's R&D money that's going into this as well. That's probably not going to show up a lot in the top 10 contractors. That's going to be a lot of smaller firms until it kind of grows and becomes something bigger. But I did want to mention that that exists in here as well. And so we've got services firms, systems integrators, those research So we've got R&D firms, but we've also got federally funded research and software providers, defense contractors.
Hey, Laura, we're having some technical difficulties. Your audio. Completely lost your audio. Let's, no, still nothing there. Let's, it shows that you have audio, so maybe let's try, let's go up to your, on the control panel, go up to audio, and it gives you an option, computer, phone, or no audio. Click off to no audio and then back on the computer, and that might work. All right, see if that worked.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we're back.
Perfect. Do you want to let me know where you last heard me, and I can pick up there?
Good question. It just started getting garbly just right at the end, so you should be good.
Okay, perfect. So I'll pick up here. If you all have any questions, please let me know. I'm happy to answer them. What I was saying on this slide is that I think that this market is, because it needs so many different types of products and services, this is a great market for small businesses because of all of those niche little cybersecurity things that different contractors can do. And that shows here. So about a third of the whole market is small businesses, and about of that, about 3/4 of it is through set-asides. So agencies are realizing that they want to set aside money for small businesses, and they're setting aside a decent chunk, something like 1/4 of all the cyber market for small businesses. And then small businesses are still winning. They're still winning contracts through full and open competitions as well, because they clearly have something great to offer, even as a small business. So that's awesome. And so I wanted to just make sure that everyone knows that this market is both great from a small business perspective, and it's what I was saying on the other slide is that because the top 10 agencies don't account for a huge portion of the market, so you've got excuse me, the top 10 are accounting for about 1/3. The small businesses are accounting for about 1/3. And so then the other 1/3 of the market is going to be non-small businesses that aren't in that top 10. So it's a nice mix of all different types of contractors in this market. And it's a great market, I think, to break into, and also to just remain competitive if you're kind of a mid-tier business as well. And then the top agencies buying cyber products and services from small businesses are Navy and Air Force coming out of DoD, and then the top ones in the civilian space are DHS and VA, like I was mentioning before, and then HHS as well. And then finally, the top contracts are going to look very similar to the ones we saw on the top contract slide. We see IT70, we see SOUP. SOUP is showing up as a bigger contract for small businesses than IT70. And then Seaport and 8A Stars 2 jumps up since that's a big small business contract. And you'll see sometimes I wanted to mention in case I missed one, you might see large businesses showing up in the small businesses section, and we usually have something like that. You can see that one down at the bottom. Cerner Corp was showing up as the 10th largest one. The reason for that is because it acquired this company, Able Vets, in October of 2019, and Able Vets is a small business, so it's still showing up as a small business in this space, even though now that it's been acquired, we wouldn't consider Cerner Corp a small business. So you might see something else on this list and you might say, this is not a small business, why is this showing up? The reason it's showing up is because it's classified as a small business by the government, and it might be because it's been acquired by another company. And then before I answer some questions, I wanted to talk to you all a little bit about cyber opportunities and how kind of how we're tracking these at BGov, and kind of why some of these are showing up on the list even though they're not, fully cyber opportunities. So the first thing is that you'll see a lot of these large multiple award contracts, again, similar to, seeing the large multiple award contracts on the contract slide. And the reason for this is because we expect a large portion of these contracts to go to cybersecurity. All of them will not. Lots of other IT products and services will be bought through these contracts. I guess the first 4 here, can't quite read them, but I think it's the first 4 there, are all going to be large multiple award contracts that don't focus specifically on cybersecurity, but that will have a large cybersecurity component and will be important for, some of them will be important for large and small businesses. So CIO SP4 is going to be lumped together, the large and small business piece of that. And then we've got, I think we've got 8A Stars 3 on here. Sorry, I'm having a hard time reading all of this. Although I think that one is actually in source selection at this point. So I can see that there's a small business one on here. I can't quite see what I have. I'm trying to move it. Let's see. Oh, Polaris. Actually, I did want to talk about that one. Sorry, guys. So Alliant 2 Small Business is being replaced by Polaris now. We don't know exactly when that solicitation is going to come out and what it's going to be yet, but we're expecting it in the second quarter of 2021, so sometime between January and March. Alliant has been a pretty big contract for cybersecurity, and that's definitely one to keep an eye on if you're interested in doing cybersecurity work across the federal government, but especially with DHS. DHS has used Alliant quite a bit. So I wanted to mention those, and then I also wanted to mention that it's not that we're tracking those large contracts in something called the top 20 opportunities that we always keep updated on BGov. Those are going to be our big opportunities valued at least $1 billion. So we're always tracking those, and the IT ones we typically expect to spend some money on cybersecurity. So that's kind of what we're looking at in the top 4 here. But then we have a bunch of other contracts that we're tracking at BGov. We tend to focus, when it comes to IT, on cybersecurity, cloud, and AI. So we if we see a large cybersecurity opportunity, we'd like to write that up, make sure that our clients are aware of it, and then track those opportunities as they go through the cycle. So the ones that you're seeing, the final 6, starting at this U.S. Space Force one, are contracts that we are tracking and that have a pretty high value. The lowest one on this list is about $93 million, but these are all solidly cybersecurity contracts that we think are worth keeping an eye on because we expect an RFP this year. So definitely good contracts to keep an eye on. There's a nice mix of civilian and defense contracts here, most of them coming out of defense right now, but that's to be expected because they seem to be spending more and more money on cybersecurity each year. I think that was all I wanted to say about these ones. I am going to stop sharing my screen and see if there are any questions that I can answer for you all, but thank you very much for listening to my presentation. This is my contact information. If you have any questions that you don't want to ask here or if anything comes up later, I believe you all will be getting the slides, so you'll have this contact information in there. I'm happy to answer any of your questions.
All right, thanks, Laura. Let me just change to my screen. All right, yeah, any questions out there for Laura at this point? While you're thinking about questions, I am going to do a polling question as well. So let's launch that polling question. So where are you working from today? Home, office, elsewhere? And yeah, use the questions link that you find on the panel to put in any questions you have for Laura. Handouts for her presentation are in the handout section of the program. All right, I'm going to close the poll. There we go. Most 84% of us are working from home. 16% are in the office. Well, good for you for getting back to the office. Any questions for Laura?
Hey, Laura, it's Elizabeth. That was great. Thank you so much for giving us that overview. I have actually a couple questions, and I'm happy to take those offline for later, and I know that you're making this available. Do you see, and I think this is one of the ones also coming in, do you see a lot of like any lapse in government spending based on, the current pandemic environment, or do you see that, that's kind of unchanged as people are planning maybe with more robust technologies?
Sorry, I'm having a little bit of a hard time hearing you. So let me try to repeat what I think I heard, and you can correct me. Are you asking if there's been a lapse in any cybersecurity spending? Is that based on COVID or something else? Just wondering where the question is coming from and whether I'm hearing it.
Or do you see like an increase in that spending?
Yeah, so I would say as far as that goes, I know that a bunch of people were kind of concerned about both spending changes and also opportunities or solicitations coming out. So I can kind of address both of those things. So spending, we're not seeing any spending going down because of COVID. In the IT market, we're actually seeing an increase in spending. I would say in the IT market overall, I didn't look a whole lot at COVID spending in cybersecurity. I did check on it, and there is a little bit of overlap between COVID and cyber spending. But a lot of the IT money is going more toward things that are helping people work from home. So VPNs, laptops, desktops, other kind of telework related things. I don't expect that to be the case in fiscal 2021. So one thing that I think is really great is that the stimulus money didn't have to be used by the end of fiscal 2020. So there's still a bunch of money, we think, left for IT spending that's coming out of that stimulus package, the CARES Act. We can't be totally sure exactly how much money is remaining, but based on how much money has been spent, we do think that there's a decent chunk of money left for IT. So we both saw IT spending go up this year and expect it to go up in the future for cybersecurity. One thing I will say is that so we saw that money going up for like telework related things. I think moving forward, now that agencies have kind of spent the money on those things they like really need right now, like new laptops for people, I do think now that they've addressed that, they can now move over to the IT modernization piece and the cybersecurity piece, and they can spend more money on that. We have seen more, we've seen agencies talking a little bit more about implementing a zero trust framework and how important that is right now because of so many people working from home. So we think that more money might be spent in order to kind of get to that strategy and spend more money on the technologies needed for that, which will include cybersecurity. Agencies are worried about modernization and making sure that things are up to date so that it's not a cybersecurity problem. So we think some of the money from the CARES Act could go toward that moving forward as well. So rather than it being, COVID impacting agency spending for IT and cybersecurity in a bad way, it's actually bringing more money. And we expect that in fiscal 2021 as well. From the opportunity side, it's a little bit hard to tell right now. Agencies were worried, or not agencies, some clients were worried about not seeing as many solicitations going out in October compared to previous years. I don't think, so we looked into that and that was not the case. Overall, quite a bit more solicitations have been coming out across the federal government, across all markets. When we look specifically at IT, the numbers were down a little bit. I don't know, we didn't go dig down into that to see with cybersecurity whether or not the numbers were down there, but IT as a whole, there were fewer solicitations coming out in October compared to previous Octobers. I am not reading too much into that. The money's there. Agencies have figured out how to make this work. It's, we're a lot of months in. I think it's that there was a lot of activity at the end of the fiscal year, especially with spending more money on COVID, that I think maybe they're just taking a little bit of a breather there, and they're going to pick back up in November. This is definitely something we're tracking. At the end of each month, I'm planning to see what civilian agencies are doing with IT, see if there's more solicitations going out, fewer. If it seems to be a problem, seems to look like a little worrying, we'll definitely be reporting on that. Elizabeth, did you have another question?
I think that was it from my end. I have tons of questions, so I'll be reaching out to you offline. But thank you so much. That was wonderful, Laura. And again, you have your presentation here in the handouts for the attendees to download and be able to reach out to you as well directly with questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And again, if anyone has any questions for me, my contact information is in there. So thank you very much for listening in.
Thank you. And I know you have an upcoming webinar too as well for Bloomberg Thursday, aren't you? So you can check that out on your website, I take it, and if you want to sign up for that, for more.
Yep, for sure.
Great. Thank you, Laura. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you.
We have, all right, so that's session one. We appreciate Laura's insight. The next session we'll go to is a CMMC DIB Supply Chain Operationalizing Audit Readiness. Do you want, Elizabeth, should we take a quick 10-minute break and then come back at 10 o'clock Eastern?
Yes, I think that's good. I know that some of our panelists are just hopping on in the next couple minutes, so we'll be back right at 10 a.m.
All right, we'll do that. We'll come back at 10 a.m. Short break, and don't close out. We'll just mute and be back.
Go grab a coffee.
There we go. All right, you should see my screen. We got the session number 2 up there. I will let Elizabeth, if you want to introduce the panel. I'm going to do a quick polling question before we get started here for everyone. In your opinion, what is the most important cybersecurity issue today?
Thank you.
Breaches, ransomware, malware, all of the above, compliance challenges, or attacks by foreign actors. This is unscientific polling, so
What's the margin of error, Todd?
yes. All right, I'll give another 10 seconds, and then we'll close that poll. We'll get started with our panel.
I can't take it.
No, I'm sorry. Panelists and organizers not allowed to vote. But you can
You
certainly
can tell us what you think afterwards, Katie.
All right, I'll give another 5 seconds, and I'll close this poll. People are still voting. That's good. All right, closing the poll. Let's share the results. There we go. 41% said all of the above. I think most people are concerned about compliance challenges, attacks by foreign actors, breaches, ransomware. There you go. All right, Elizabeth, turn it over to you for introductions.
Yay, okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for returning for our session number 2, which has a really nice lineup of experts here. Our session CMMC did supply chain and operationalizing audit readiness. We'll come with a lot of different perspectives and viewpoints, and I'm sure you'll all have a lot of questions, so try to make this short. We have Katie Arrington, our CISO of A&S, Department of Defense, on here, and the author of CMMC, so she will have quite a bit to say. Ed Bassett, CISO from Neosystems, thank you, and you'll be moderating today. Eric Crucius, partner with Howland Knight. Mike Baker, CISO with GDIT. Neil Began with Cherry Beckert, and Jeff Trinidad, head of supply chain for L3 Harris. So thanks so much, guys, for joining us. We really appreciate it, ladies and gentlemen. And without that, further ado, we'll get started.
Hi, good morning, everybody. We've got, as Elizabeth mentioned, we've got a really action-packed panel here for you today. So I'm going to dive right in with a very minimal amount of lead-in. I think, you know, these panelists represent a wide variety of perspectives. So our hope is to really take a look at how we can accelerate CMMC for the supply chain, small, medium-sized businesses in particular, and you know, get words into your heads that are useful as you seek to make those moves right now that you need to do. So we'll start out with that. We'll start out with immediate steps. What are the things that the SMBs should be doing right now if they're not doing them already? And I'll start with Katie.
So the DFAR rule 7012, how many people on the call know what that is? Because it's changing. It's what day is today? I'm so sorry. How many days to the interim rule goes public? I mean, goes
13
live?
days.
13 days. So the immediate, what y'all need to do is, if you have that clause in your contract and you anticipate a contract award after December 1st, you need to go into the supplier performance risk system. I said it right today. SPRS, Ed, our time yesterday, I think I misspelled it or misspoke the acronym like 9 times. Please, if you're expecting an award after December 1st, it's you as a company need to go into the SPRS database. You need to register your company, Kate code, the prime. I think there are 9 different questions that are asked, but more importantly, you need to do your self-assessment on your implementation, your company's implementation of the Nist, National Institute of Standards and Technology, special publication 800-171. It's 110 controls, and it's needed and required prior to contract awards. So near term, that's happening like right now. There are 2 other rules that spin out of the 7012 DFAR rule. The first one is the 7019, which I just mentioned, the SPRS. There's the 7020, which I'm sure we'll talk about, and the 7021. But near term, it's happening. The thing that is most impactful is this does not change. I don't care what administration comes in. This is happening. There is no slowing this. This is about you as a company, getting you the very best critical thinking around cybersecurity, because it does matter. And this panel today, it's, the CMMC is one piece of a much bigger puzzle of how do we create a cyber hardened supply chain for the enduring capabilities.
So Katie, CMMC has been kind of at the center of the talk until those DFARS clauses came out. Are these reporting requirements, the SPRS reporting, is this kind of warm up for CMMC? There's other things going on too, right? There's more to it as far as DFCAC assessments, other things that are part of that.
Absolutely. So the 7019 clause is the SPRS. That is, if you currently have the 7012 clause in your contracts, the DFAR clause, it gave birth to 3. So the 7019 is the SPRS, and you would look at that as the crawl, right? If you were to look at a crawl, walk, run, or the strategy to get to CMMC, the next clause is the 7020 clause. That is the companies that are required have a medium or high DIB assessment. So if you're doing 80 or more controls, the government in the DFAR rule is called the department. It's also known as DCMA, Defense Contracting Management Agency, has the right to come in and do an audit of your company's assessment. So you do the SPRS assessment, the government reserves the right to trust but verify, big thing. And the DIBCAC has been doing audits for the past year. We're working reciprocity with the CMMC. So that's the walk, right? So crawl, self-assessment, we're trust but verify, you have to log it into the system. We're verifying with the DIBCAC. Know that is not a massive team. I think it's about 50 FTE. We have over 300,000 companies in the supply chain, so we could never do all of the audits required. So that's why we created the CMMC in the department. The last rule that's spurned out of that 7012 clause is 7021. And that states that the CMMC must be fully implemented in all DoD contracts no later than October of 2025. That's what we've been talking about for years. It's a 5-year rollout plan. But when the rule goes into effect on December 1st, the Department of Defense will have 15 contracts that it will release over FY21 that will have the CMMC in it. So we knew we were going to have to dial this up. It's the crawl, the walk, the run, but ultimately all 3 rules are the same fundamental. A, all acquisition is based on security, period, end of sentence, no discussion further on that. The Department of Defense has said cybersecurity is foundational to all acquisitions. The only ones that are exempt are the micro purchases under $10,000 and the COTS specific products. So we are not asking to get re-cyber certified on Microsoft licenses, those are already certified through another means. The COTS products have their own certifications, ATOs, etc. So know that we believe in you, we trust our community, but we need to verify. And the last thing is that each of those has the costs in the DFAR, in the Federal Registry. We actually express how much we think it ought to cost, because we do anticipate and we suggest building cybersecurity and the cost into your rates.
Sounds good. Any other panelists have any comments on immediate steps, things people should be doing right now, today, right as soon as they finish the Cybersecurity Summit?
I mean, just a couple of quick thoughts. All Katie's points are obviously well taken. From a contractor perspective, you want to look at your contract and see if you have the 7012 clause in your contract, because that's going to mean that these other clauses that Katie just spoke about, not Cmmc necessarily immediately, but these other clauses are going to be impacting you very soon, potentially. So it's not just going to be a self-certification anymore. There's going to be maybe some verification of that self-certification that's been happening over the last number of years. But as Katie and other folks within DoD have brought up repeatedly, if you have 7012 in your contract and you have a covered information system, then there's been an assumption that you have been complying. So you want to be careful about the certifications you have been making and will be making, because if you've had this information, you've been handling it, you've been essentially been certifying that you have been complying all along as we've gone through this process over the last few years. So, to Katie's point, I think contractors should really be paying attention if they're handling CUI and have the 7012 clause in their contract, because there may be, DoD may be taking a closer look at that compliance.
Yeah, and I want to add on to that, Eric. I mean, you also, the era of their perpetual POAM is coming to an end. So I think we need to, people need to get honest about that. They need to look at their POAMs and they need to put in real investments and plans to get out of that, right? And you're gonna have to put that in SPRS. You're gonna have to put when you'll get to 110. So I think that's gonna be a big impact to small companies who have had POAMs on their books for a number of years. And I think it's gonna really impact their budget planning and their investments in their cyber program in the out years.
Michael, I couldn't agree more on that. One of the things that I was on a call yesterday, somebody asked me, have you seen any impact of the CMMC? And absolutely. I mean, from the DIBCAC audits that were in early 2019 to what we're looking at today, those assessments, in the very beginning, and no kidding, we had a couple of companies that came in at negative. I didn't even know you could get a negative, right? And we've watched them increase because it's closing that gap on the POAMs. And I said, and Ed, Michael, Eric, we've been on a lot of webinars, but I think in the very beginning, one of the things that we all said is the adversary's walking through those POAMs like it's Swiss cheese. And closing those gaps, really getting companies positioned to understand, nothing happens by coincidence, that the whole, you look at this wave of cybersecurity, it didn't start in 2020, it started much before that, but that this convolution of effects at one time, COVID happening, the DFAR rule happening, what we have seen going forward in other agencies all started. It's been a momentum that's been growing, and I think we're just now here. And at the top of the mountain, we're just getting up there. So stay tuned, stay informed, stay connected, and be aware of your environment and what you need in your contracts, because we don't want to lose you.
I'll make a comment about the negative scores. I'm supposed to be the moderator, right? So I'm going to still chime in on this. Somebody who doesn't have an SSP and wants to calculate their score, it's easy. You can calculate it this afternoon, right? During the break, it's a 0. Just send it to Spurs, take your lumps. If you decide to spend the lunch break making up an SSP and you've been ignoring the DFARS 7012 clause for the last 4 years since it was, effected in 2017, then you're probably going to get a negative score, right? You're probably going to do worse than the 0 that you would get by saying, I don't have an SSP. So so don't work too hard on it. Put your score in there, and then start looking at those requirements and try to try to get those things implemented. The score is not the end in of itself, right? So next topic I want to move to is clarifying the requirements. So if people have questions about these requirements we're talking about and how they apply to their particular situation, I've seen a lot of questions. What if I don't have CUI? What if I'm foreign owned? What if I have a complex environment? So there's all these questions out there about the requirements. So I want to kind of turn to Eric and ask him, where do you go if you have questions about the requirements and how they apply to your situation?
The regulations. I mean, that's really that's the source. Whenever I try to figure something out, I go to the regulations themselves, keeping in mind that they're not user friendly, and it's not, companies aren't necessarily, built to read regulations and kind of sort these things out. I'd say DoD has put out a lot of good information about where to go. Law firm blogs have put out a lot of good information about where to go, and it's kind of to Katie's point before about trusting and verifying. You want to read these things and maybe have a trust, but you want to verify what they're saying is true. The problem I think that contractors are faced with now, and this is not a criticism of DoD, is that there's a lot of different kind of avenues of compliance. You have the 7012 clause, you have the 3 new clauses that came out in the Federal Register, and they all make logical sense together, but I could see from a contractor standpoint, it can be kind of confusing about what you need to do. The most important thing is to determine whether you have CUI that you're handling or creating for the government. If you don't, then your obligations in the cybersecurity field are going to be quite a bit less. But if you do, that's where a lot of these things are triggered. A CMMC level 3 will be required eventually. Compliance with the 7012 clause that you're certifying to. The 7-17, 18, and 19, or 18, 19, and 20 clauses will require compliance with. So the first thing to do, if you're just kind of starting from scratch and just don't know where to turn, is see whether you have the CUI as part of your contracts. If you do, it's going to be a very different story than if you don't. Because if you don't, the likely scenario is that you have a FAR clause that's pretty easy to comply with from a cybersecurity standpoint. But I'd also point out, too, that a lot of agencies have their own cyber requirements. So you want to look to your contract to see if there are any separate requirements. The larger point there is that you always look to your contract. That's where your obligations are going to be. Your contract with the federal government or your contract with your prime contractor are going to have the clauses that you have to comply with in it. And if you think there's a clause that's there that shouldn't be there, for instance, if you see the 7012 clause and you don't have CUI, you talk to the government about it, you talk to your prime contractor about it. But I always say, kind of look to the contract, and that will give you the answers of what you need to do.
So on that note, I want to, there's a couple of different resources that companies can go to. First, the CUI is a big thing. The Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security posted a new desk reference guide. You can go to dodcui.mil. It is open. It gives great examples, a workbook, a working desk guide to understand if your company is touching, transmitting, storing CUI. So that's a free resource that everybody can go down, go to the website. They did a phenomenal job. Part 2, that to me is a big thing, right? And understanding that the department, as much as we're looking at industry and saying, hey, you need to get to, good on cyber, we in the department have come back and realized that we have to restructure everything. When McNamara created our acquisition strategy back in 1950 or 1960, lots have changed, as cyber wasn't even a word then. You move forward, the department rolled out the adaptive acquisition framework. We rewrote the 5000 series, but the big question is on the cybersecurity, because we've made it foundational to all acquisition. Who is going to be the ones in charge of the flow down? Who's going to say what requirements need the CMMC certification? A lot of small businesses have been concerned that, this is going to be the way that the prime edges them out. That is absolutely not the case. All the requirements are still going to be there. The small business portions, all of that is remaining. But what we have done is in the new 5000.CS, we actually worked with the CUI guide to really clearly call out to the PMs as they're crafting these statements of work. The default will be CMMC level 1. So whether you've got the 70-12 clause or not, right, as we move through these out years and the 70-21 clause becomes the all, right, that at bare minimum, everyone is going to need a CMMC level 1. So regardless of whether you're touching CUI today or which of the 3 clauses, think to yourself, basic is CMMC level 1. I need to do those 17 basics. And, you know, I can defer to, you know, Jeff or Neil, your thoughts about that, but that's how the department is viewing it, that we have it baked in on every contract. That way it grows companies' capability, critical thinking, their maturity around the cybersecurity.
Other panelists have comments on how to get
clear? Yeah, I completely agree with Katie, kind of the stepping stone approach of advising our clients that if nothing else at this point, taking a look at level 1, getting familiar while doing the things that Eric mentioned in terms of looking at your contracts and so forth, but knowing that level 1 is going to be kind of the minimum bar as this rolls out over the next 5 years. So absolutely agree.
And with L3 Harris, we're following a similar approach throughout our supply chain, focusing on that level 1 requirement.
Got it. So let me move to education and support. So people who are new to this game and looking to do a good job, do the right thing in terms of getting education and support resources. I want to turn to you, Jeff. I know you're doing a lot in terms of trying to help out your supply chain, making sure that they're educated, making sure they have the support they need. It goes back to getting clarity on the requirements, but it also goes to learning kind of nuts and bolts, right? How do we implement this? How do we get a hold of solutions that are gonna work to get our cyber hygiene where it needs to be?
Yeah, so I think our other panelists have provided a great overview of some open source you know, materials that you can go and get better educated on what the requirements are. I would say that engaging with your prime or your subcontractors is really key. I know it sounds very basic, but I think there's a lot of angst on both sides. You know, not only are small businesses, you know, questioning what do I need to do, but as a lead in aerospace and defense, my concern is my supply chain ready? And I think that's a gap that we have. So if you continue to communicate throughout your supply chain and build those resources, you have a mutually beneficial relationship. You know, me as a prime kind of gathers additional insight into my supply chain and where we're at, as well as helping identify maybe gaps that we can help our suppliers in that ecosystem better prepare as this continues throughout the years. So one thing that we have done, and I think most of the major aerospace and defense companies are doing, is they're setting up partnerships. So I know that we do partner with Neo Systems, and we established a portal that any L3 Harris supplier can go to. They register, they have access to all the information and resources that we've talked about already. They can go in and do a self-assessment, and then they can attend webinars. We've hosted 5 webinars in conjunction with Neo Systems, giving an introduction to what CMMC is, going through each level of CMMC, and then I think on later this month, we're going to do our final webinar on how to prepare for an audit. And I'm sure a lot of the other prime contractors out there are doing something similar. So at the end of the day, I would, you know, for education and support purposes, I would reach out if you're a small business and ask your prime, what are you doing? And I think you'd be surprised on the level of effort and preparation that primes are putting in place, because if they can get you engaged, it helps them proactively and strategically look at, you know, overall readiness over the next couple of years.
Any other panelists want to chime in on that, on the education support?
So I will say I have, you know, as you know, the mommy of the CMMC, and we joke around about that, but I'm really not the momentum. when we in the department had the conversation about the CMMC in the very beginning, I came from industry, so I believe in industry. I know what you guys can do. So when you put the challenge in front of industry and you give a clear, concise, this is our expectation, this is our timeline, this is how we're going to do it. Large primes, along with the smalls, have all across the board come together and did exactly what I knew we could do, right? The large primes are working with their supply chains. They're looking at the ones within the supply chain that may need help. They have come up with incredibly, I would say, out of the box solutions that, to help small businesses, but not negate them, right? So you have a small business on one of your contracts. For all the lawyers on the call, this one will be a lot of fun. There was a big push in the beginning for the DoD to create a cloud that all the smalls could go into to do their work if they had to touch CUI. And I originally went back and I'm like, no. We want your IP, that thing that makes you so unique and capable. We don't want to create a crutch for you. What we need industry to do, we need the services to bring down the CSPs and the managed service providers, that because we've given a very clear direction of what is expected from the government, the greater the quantity, the more competitive, the cost drives down. But other ideas like the CSPs coming up with small business size subscriptions for Aisle 4, Aisle 5 cloud, FedRAMP moderate, FedRAMP high. A lot of the large primes creating cloud environments for program specific so that the small businesses don't need to get the CMMC level 3, that they can actually go into the cloud. But the moreover is that the more, and I don't want to use the word autonomous, but that's not my true meaning, but the more independence and self-preservation that a small business can create, right, to be an enduring capability, to invest in themselves, to be around in the long haul, only benefits all of us. I mean, when we started off, the big question was in the industry, in the building, can industry do this? And I said, industry has met the challenge every single time when the department makes clear guidance, clear direction, says what they're willing to pay for it, and adheres to a timeline. Industry will always meet the demand. So I applaud my large primes, my GDIT, my L3 Harris's, and I applaud the Neo Systems and the Holland Knights and all of the law firms that have, Cherry and Becker getting to the goodness of it all, right? That there isn't anything that we as a community, understanding the Internet of Things, understanding how connected we are in our industrial base, pulling together, we have created something that you don't get to see, but maybe twice, 3 times in a lifetime. And it's because of this community. It's because their willingness to lean in. And I am just floored at the amount of conversation, the capability of those on this panel and the people listening today. You guys got it. You heard the message, and there's nowhere to go but up from here. But I firmly believe in, and on what was said by Jeff, the primes have taken action. They've done things to help. We've worked through the Office of Small Businesses to give product assistance to smalls. So if anybody is saying that it's a bridge too far or too high, you're not looking hard enough, because this is a panel of people who are all in it to win it.
So before I leave the education topic, I want to, there's an audience question about the website, Katie, that you mentioned, the CUI website. Can you repeat that DoD
Sure.
website?
DoD CUI, that's, controlled and classified information .mil. And I'm just double checking because I pulled it up a moment ago on my phone.
That's right. I went there too.
Yep.
Excellent. All right, thanks. And the other one, as far as official DoD websites, I'll mention is the Dod Procurement Toolbox. I don't know the website, but it's you can Google it, and it has a really good FAQ on cybersecurity. It's not about these new requirements, but it really gets to the heart of what's expected from 7012 clause that we've all been living with. So anybody who's got questions of clarity there, that's one of the better official words coming out on the DoD website.
Yeah, and make sure you pay attention to industry ISACs and things like that. I mean, there's a ton of resources out there, frequently asked questions. ND ISAC is a huge one. You know, there's no shortage of good resources out there, right? But I think people also have to be wary of people trying to take advantage of this program for commercial benefit way too early. So make sure you're going to a reputable source, and you know, proceed with caution if someone's guaranteeing something that isn't even built yet.
Yeah, and add one, you know, I was going to say there's with open source social media, and what you'll see is a lot of commentary on LinkedIn. I think 90% of it is good, but there are some naysayers out there, and so when you see articles or you see something related to Nist or Cmmc, you really got to read. Don't just take it for face value, because if you do so, you might be led astray. So you just got to be cautious when going on social media to get your information.
I would say that on that, Jeff, here, right? The easiest thing, and it's, you know, the simple stuff is what you should pay attention to. If anybody has ever read The Art of War, what is the easiest way to destroy? It's from within, right? And causing distrust and disruption within a community, a supply chain. I laugh every morning when I wake up, and I mean, I giggle to myself when I have 400 and something hits on social media because I'm tagged in everything. So whenever they put my name to it on LinkedIn, everybody sees it. The CMMC AB accreditation body is the only ones currently to have the right to train or authorize trainers, testers, or certifiers for the accreditation, for the CMMC accreditation. No one is licensed beyond provisional because the rule change hasn't gone into effect. So if somebody is soliciting your company and saying, I can certify you CMMC, if they don't use the word provisional, they're already not right. So please, we're so close. We are just a few weeks away, but do your own homework. Don't take everything at face value. You know, that's the whole critical thinking about cyber. You know, I talk about it whenever we've been together over the past 2 years, right? Critical thinking is what we're hoping to create with the CMMC, not a checklist. So it's not as important that you're doing two-factor authentication. Don't get me wrong, it is. But it's more important that you understand why you're doing two-factor authentication, right? It's more important for your company to understand risk and understand that one way to access needs to be redone and backed up with another way because the adversary is interested in you. And everything about you, when they hit you, is what they're taking. They're not just worried about the DoD information. They're very interested in your PHI, your PII, your personnel information, your banking information, who your supply chain is, who your vendors are. So it's encompassed in the national defense, but it's really about you and getting good for you.
So I want to move on to some of the reporting outside of what the government's requiring. So there's been a lot of action by large primes lately. Since the interim rule came out, it's really accelerated to make sure they've really got a handle on what's going on in their supply chain. And Jeff mentioned this a little bit in his remarks, but I want to go to Mike and kind of get some insight into what folks should be doing to meet the expectations of their upstream primes. Right, the upstream primes are trying to mitigate their risk, trying to make sure that they don't have stragglers out there that are going to cause problems on a bid, but also trying to help out those who need help. So Mike, can you talk a little bit about, some of that early readiness reporting that's happening and how companies should be responding to that?
Yeah, I do believe I'm going to be repeating a lot of what the other panelists have said here, right? And I think we do need to keep it simple, right? We started the discussion to get ready to put your score in SPRS. And not only get your score in SPRS, I mean, that's going to take some time. You have to understand how to get into the system or email to get that that score updated. You have to make sure that you can stand behind that score. You have to make sure you can stand behind the date that you will get to 110. So I think there's a lot of stuff that companies need to really put into that. It's not just as simple as putting a number in or as simple as it has been with 7012. So I think you really need to look at that SSP, as I mentioned before, look at that POAM, really come to terms with where you are and get that score and make that factual and realistic in that system. I mean, that's obviously what you need to do. I always go back to the fact that 7012 has been around for a while, right? If you've been subjected to 7012, you have 110 requirements that you should have put into place. So at GDIT, we've always looked at those representations and certifications and asked the critical questions. I'm very interested in seeing where that's going to go with SPRS reporting. We mentioned before understanding CUI. Katie gave a great resource there. Not everyone's going to touch CUI, but I always go back to the root cause of this, right? As GDIT, do I need to pass CUI if I don't have to, right? So as a prime, I'm really looking at how we're tagging that data, understanding the data that we're getting. And my expectation, my small business partners, is to also understand what CUI is and ask the critical questions, not only of your teaming partners, but of your customer to say, hey, is this CUI? Do I need it to do my job? Can we limit the proliferation of that throughout the supply chain? I really think they need to understand that. Just because, you had 7012, there is an option there that if you don't touch CUI and you can prove that, you may go from 17 controls level 1 to 130 in level 3. That's a huge jump, right? And that is definitely motivation for our small business partners to really understand what CUI is and how they touch it. I think that's big. And then, I go to the people thing, right? Engage early and often. We talked about all the resources available to the industry here, right? Our number one mission here, I mean, I do look at our business resiliency and our supply chain, but our number one mission here is to protect the data that we've been entrusted with, right, across the board. Of course, I want to make sure that our business partners and our business ecosystem stays intact and that we can continue to bid with the partners that we have. But my number one thing is to protect that CUI as it relates to this rule. So we're in this together, and I want all the small businesses there is don't be shy, right? Engage Jeff, engage me, engage anyone on this panel to see how we can get there, right? We have a lot of resources. GDIT, GD, and I know Jeff and other companies are building ways in which we can bring small businesses into our ecosystem if we have to, right? So that all starts with a conversation. And similar to what you said, Jeff, we're reaching out, we're having information sessions, we're having one-on-one sessions with our small businesses. We just need you to meet us halfway, join those conversations, be honest about where you are, and as a community, we can come together to protect the information that we've been entrusted with. That's big. And then I think the last point I have is just looking at and talking directly to my cyber peers, right? This is no longer just a cyber issue within your company. You need to form the relationships between your supply chain counterparts, your contracts teams, and your cyber teams. This is a holistic effort. At GD, again, I've been fortunate to have those relationships, so we've been able to kind of charge ahead here, but I know that's not the case everywhere. This isn't just about putting controls in place on your enterprise environments or other enclaves. This is about engaging your supply chain to make sure it's resilient to protect this data. So that's going to take you reaching out and saying, hey, contracts team, let's talk, right? Let's talk about these new DFARS. Hey, supply chain guy, let's talk about who we're engaging, right? And I think that's absolutely critical because sometimes in cyber, we like to kind of be in our own little corner and put protections in and think it's all about just the cyber controls, but this is much bigger than that. I think everyone needs to know that.
And just to follow up on Michael's excellent point is that a lot of times these breaches happen through a subcontractor because foreign actors will target the subcontractors because they see them as a weaker link. Everyone remembers that target breach, the so-called target breach. The breach didn't occur actually within target system. It was a subcontractor. I spoke at an event 7 or 8 years ago, and somebody came up to me who had 2 employees who suffered a breach because of a foreign actor because the subcontractor had access to a prime contractor's systems. So these folks are really sophisticated, and they're going to look to the subcontractors, to infiltrate systems, and that's why all these clauses are being flowed down to subcontractors, and why it's important to have those conversations that Michael was talking about.
Anybody else have anything they want to put it on that dialogue? One thing I want to mention on that is the idea of really getting, Mike, I appreciate your comment about the dialogue and having that dialogue be open. I think it's been very valuable. And I think there are a lot of small businesses that I talk with. They're not really sure what the expectations of their primes are. They know they're asking for a score, but they're asking questions like, I'm not sure if I really have CUI. I'm not sure if I need to do all these things. I can just do the 17 things in level 1 and be good. That dialogue is critically important, I think, and it's a fork in the road for businesses of, are you able to store and process CUI or are you not? And it depends on what kind of business you're in, what the appropriate answer to that question is. And I think, that's worth having a very open dialogue with your customers to make sure you're really getting to clarity on that, especially if you're trying to take the level 1 path, right? It limits your capability. So is that appropriate for the kind of business you're in? Is that going to meet the expectations of your primes? Mike, you mentioned that we're trying to reduce the number of companies that you share CUI with to those where it's necessary. That's a very important point. But similarly, on the other side of that conversation too, I think people need to make sure they have clarity over what level they're trying to do. And that clarity can't really wait till the CMMC rollout. They need to decide now because it affects how they do SPURS reporting.
Yeah, I mean, nothing ever gets better in a vacuum, right? So we have to have that dialogue. I mean, I think the key is we send invitations, and I think usually when someone gets a letter from a larger prime, they may take that as, oh, I got to do something. But these are conversations that you need to take advantage of, right? Because from a level 1 perspective, again, I'm very fortunate. Like level 1 to me is not a thing, right? We can help you get there, and we can help draw clarity on where you need to be to get to level 1 or level 3 based on our knowledge of the contract and the data that we have. But if we don't have those conversations and it happens too late, we're going to be in a pretty bad situation, right? Because we won't be fulfilling what our obligations are, number 1. Number 2, you're just not going to have time to make the improvements. And part of me is intrigued because this is not new, right? This has been all year, right? We've been talking about this. So and now we're at the point, November 30th. You got to get serious about it, and you got to make a public attestation of what your score is. And if you're not talking to your teaming partners, you're going to be behind the 8 ball.
And the one thing I'll add, we're talking about the DFAR rule and a lot about that. But no, this is not just the DoD. I mean, this really is something that your business, there are just those moments in time where you just can't go back. After 9/11, we changed the way the world traveled, and there was no going back. The world of cyber and how interconnected we are, there's no going back. Most of you people today, participants and attendees and panelists, are either doing it teleworking or you're I'm in the Pentagon in the studio room, but we're communicating on cyber. It's a small word for a lot. But for your company to have viability in the future, the DFAR rule, got it. What's more important is you really understand that this is not going to be just the Department of Defense. I mean, we have the Solarium report out there and legislation that's in draft moving around to amend Sarbanes-Oxley to make that part of a company's filing information, your cybersecurity rating, your security rating score. So this, what I get nervous about, the only thing that gets me nervous is that companies think that, okay, it's only the DoD I need to worry about, right? This is only the no. The adversary's been paying attention to you for a long time. Everybody on the panel is keenly aware of this. China didn't start looking at us in 2016, 2018 timeframe, right? China's been there for a minute, and they've been doing a lot of pull of data for a long time. They're very strategic. They have long-term goals. Their dynasties are thousands of years. Our democracy is but a few hundred plus, right? Long-term survivability. Russia, been out there. Cold War may have ended, but it didn't stop, right? The reality is China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and those are just the big ones. They're after your company's information. So I get the focus for the DFAR rule, but more importantly, how are you as a company, small, medium, or large, positioned to be enduring when you have not just adversarial, but competitors trying as well, right? So you need to have that posture of, this is how I'm going to guard my house. And there are multiple ways to get there. I think that a lot of the smalls, to what you were talking about, Michael, and it's been there for a minute, but you've got to get positioned to get there. Level 2 is that guide, right? So if you look at the CMMC and you look at level 2, when we created it, that really was that positioning place where you can say, okay, am I going to do this internally? Am I going to grow this capability organically? Or am I going to look outside the box to product solutions, CSP, cloud service providers, managed service providers to help me get to that level of certification? So don't know that it should be, and it's not to discredit because the large primes, right? But remember, if you're doing work with a prime and you're going down that pipe and you're going to use them as help on your CMMC3, that won't work on other vehicles, on other contracts. So you really need to develop this maturity on your own, how you want to position yourselves. Not to say the great work that the primes, large primes, do to help organically grow the small businesses. Remember, you go to Occam's razor, all companies, even Amazon, started off as a one-person shop. Remember that. Every company that is in the Fortune 5 started as a small. So keep that in mind as you want to think about how you want to get to where you want to go. The synergy may have been a merger or an acquisition to get to a large prime, but it started off with one person, one idea, and a belief that they can complete a mission. We want to really facilitate that, but really get you guys to think about the criticalness of cyber in your day-to-day business operations. Over.
So, next, I want to squeeze in a quick speed dating round. So this topic is about the solutions that are emerging in the marketplace. So Katie mentioned earlier an intention by the DoD to let the market evolve to support cybersecurity and CMMC specifically, rather than having the government sort of dictate this is the solution you must use. And I think that certainly has spurred industry to come together with some great solutions. So we're less than a year in, and we've already seen a huge mobilization of the marketplace. And somebody mentioned earlier, there is some snake oil out there for sure, but there's a lot of really well-aligned, highly secure, and easy to buy, easy to plug in solutions that are appearing in the marketplace. So quick speed dating round, top thing, best thing that you've seen coming out of CMMC in terms of the evolution of the marketplace. We'll start with Jeff.
Yeah, I'll take a basic approach. One area that we've looked at is, data transfer and encryption. And I think that's become more important when submitting or transferring CUI and ITAR data between a supplier and their subcontractors. And so, part of the engagement strategy that we're looking at is, can we implement those type of solutions and tools that make it easier on our suppliers while continuing to increase that data protection aspect? So that would probably be one simple technology that I've seen over the past year.
Very cool. Eric, go to you next, number one.
Sure. I mean, so I'm not a techie, but I would say this. The fact that there's a marketplace there, the fact that there are willing buyers of cybersecurity services themselves and people in companies who think cybersecurity compliance and just even without the hammer, being cybersecurity ready is important. I gave a presentation about 10 years ago at a conference on cyber, and like 4 people showed up because it wasn't a priority to people then, and it's a priority now. So the development of the marketplace itself from a larger perspective, I think, is a big positive.
Neil, you're next.
Yeah, 2 things stuck out. One is, if you think not too long ago, things like multi-factor were such a hurdle for some of these smaller organizations. And I think the affordability and options of multi-factor and the progress that's been made there over the years has been huge for folks kind of embarking on this path. And the second would be along those lines, utilizing technology, some of the GRC tools that are able to be implemented at an organization to help with kind of a lack of familiarity in the compliance space. Those that are done well and have experience in the government contracting in this areas, I think are good for companies to look at.
Good. Katie?
So mine is overall communication, right? That, Eric's point, those of us who are cyber, geeks, wonks, whatever you want to call us, we've been over in the background yelling for a minute now, and it really is something that what was, not on the top of anybody's social media profile 3-4 years ago, now is the top thing. And that we're talking about it, right? The only way to address a problem is to communicate, to work solutions to solve it, and communication. I applaud everybody on the panel and everybody paying attention today. That has been the best part of the entire effort, the communication.
Cool. Mike?
I'm still waiting for it. I would say a large CSP that's aligned a turnkey solution to at least level 1, maybe level 3, including virtual desktop. I think that would go a long way to help out our small businesses if they can do that at a cost that's reasonable.
Very good.
I was going to do Jeff's data one, but he stole it from me. That's the hazard of going last.
That's all right. I just went around the Zoom board, if you will. So we've got 2 more topics, about 10 minutes left, and I think we will get both of them in. So the next topic, assessment, and getting, as we look at these near-term actions, it's all getting us ready to be assessed, get certified under Cmmc. That's the 5-year plan. So maybe go to Neil, who is one of the few provisional assessors so far that's been through the training successfully. So first of all, congratulations on that, and you're leading the charge, Neil. What can people expect, and how should they get ready for the assessment piece, the actual, actually bringing in the Cmmc auditor? Some people are going to be doing that very shortly. Katie mentioned those initial contracts. So what's the process look like? What can people expect?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, Katie hit the nail on the head to kind of kick off this panel with the quote that this is happening. Despite a potential change in administration, despite an ongoing pandemic, this is coming. So no longer, can companies stick their heads in the sand? Can they think, hey, I'm a little bit too small, I don't think this is ever going to apply to me, or nobody's ever going to bother me or come and audit me or really checking on me? That's obviously going away, and providing some teeth. And Mike had mentioned kind of the death of the perpetual POAM, which I think Katie almost gave a standing ovation to earlier. So that is coming as well. So I think just from a prep perspective, we look at our clients in one of 3 categories, and kind of from most mature to not as mature. There's certainly organizations that do have experience with 7012. They may have experience with other IT and cyber-based compliance areas, be it ISO, SOC, SOC reporting, PCI, and the like. And those folks, when you think about it, are typically going to have a little easier time. You then have folks that have only been in the government contracting space, familiar with DFARS 7012, therefore have the SSP and POAM aforementioned. And then we also have a third category that we've been dealing with that folks really have no experience in any IT compliance area, and this is really coming out of left field. They have no SSP, they have no formal documentation, and from a control maturation standpoint, they're pretty low on the totem pole. So obviously, different plans for folks that fall into any one of those categories. But I think first off, identifying your compliance approach for CMMC is paramount. Are you looking at an entity level versus enclave or versus hybrid approach? Really nailing down the level that you are hoping to be certified, whether it is just level 1, as Mike mentioned, or level 3. A large variance between 17 to 130 controls that you need to comply with. And then, as mentioned earlier, really looking at your own supply chain, your own vendors that may come into play as a result of certification. And then recognizing the time commitment that this is going to take. This is a entity-wide issue, not just an IT issue, as Mike mentioned earlier, and recognizing that there is a time frame for compliance that needs to be backed into. So if you haven't already started, you are behind the 8 ball, as Mike mentioned. And so certainly time is of the essence, recognizing that a lot of this will require not only documentation, but implementation, some of which can take some time. And then recognizing the burden on internal resources. I mean, many of the folks that are going to be tasked with this in your organizations, they have their own day-to-day jobs. They have their own things that need to be accomplished during the day, sometimes outside of the compliance arena or specific to CMMC arena. So recognizing that. And then along those lines, figuring out when and where you need help. There's been a lot of talk on this panel that there are a lot of resources at your disposal. Reaching out to your primes, reaching out to your various contacts, and then potentially engaging somebody to help prepare you for an audit and conducting kind of a full-blown readiness and/or mock audit is really what we are already and have been helping clients with to date.
Neil, can I add a little color to that too? I was an auditor in my former life, so
we were together.
Yeah, we did. So I think one of the things too is like, again, keep it simple. Like I have the look yourself in the mirror rule. 800, 171 can be kind of broad, right? There's a lot of different capabilities that can allow you to think that you've achieved the objective of that control. If you can't wake up and look yourself in the mirror and be proud of what you did to put it in place, then you're probably not ready to sit across the table from someone like Neil. So you got to have that. You got to have that moment where you give it a glance. Maybe you do a pre-assessment, or maybe you bring in someone else, or maybe you just sit there and take a critical look at it yourself. But you have to be able to stand by your controls and the way in which you apply those capabilities, and be confident that when you sit in front of Neil that you're doing the right thing, right? And you're not just trying to pass the audit.
Anybody else want to chime in on the assessment process?
I'll say for this, Michael and Neil both, here, because I used to speak about, everybody thinks they look fantastic until they walk out the window, they catch themselves, and it's only in our reflection do we see the problem. The big core effort on the AD side, right, as this has all been a collaboration, right, is standardizing what the assessments, what each of the assessors see in an audit, right? So that we get firm adjudication baselines. It would be a total disruption to the program, right? If Neil on the East Coast evaluates a company and, Jeff, even though you're with the company now, but you were ever to go out and be an auditor, you look at the same two-factor authentication processes and compliance, and you see it in two different ways. So we've been working really hard to make sure that as the CMMC rolls out and the AB aligns with curriculum creators, test creators, that they're all adjudication baselines, that these individuals that are going through the assessments, Neil, through the provisional training and the actual training, we are doing, federal, trusted federal agent, we're doing clearances on these individuals. We don't want to send just anybody in, and know that as the assessment happens, if the audit individual, the assessor, is asking to take proprietary information off site, that should be something, you raise some concern with. Neil can speak to this. Our big thing is, the trust but verify, but we don't want to take your IP off of site and put it somewhere. So it's very much about getting you to good. The assessments are really critical because you do need the wake up and looking yourself in the mirror moment, right? You've got to be able to stand by it, but understand that there won't be any, I firmly believe, any audit that doesn't have question. And if the auditor's asking questions, there's never a dumb question. And they're always a moment to learn and grow. So don't be concerned if they come back and say, hey, what do you mean by this? Get it out there, make sure that you're level set, that you can stand in front of the mirror and stand by what you're reporting on your assessment.
So
that's key.
Just to close this out, I want to ask Katie a simple question. We've got about a minute left. Why? Why are you making us do this? Why is this so important to national security?
Because you're everything, right? I go to sleep at night knowing that there are good people like you that work together to protect our democracy and make I don't care what administration takes over. I really know that the adversary doesn't want you around. And if we don't band together, and if we don't look at the fact that we are all connected and we all have a risk, then there's no point to going, because the enduring capability won't be there. The why is because you matter. Because without you, we don't exist. And everybody on this webinar matters, bar none.
Thank you all. Excellent session. Appreciate it. Katie, Eric, Mike, Neil, Jeff, excellent session. And I'm going to turn it back over to, I think, Todd.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your insight. Elizabeth, do you have any other words?
No, that was riveting. Like I think my hand hurts from taking so many notes on that session. It was great. Thank you all so much. We really appreciate it. And yeah, a lot was covered in that. I'm glad it was recorded. So we're going to take a quick break, I believe, for 15 minutes, and then we're going to start with our next session at 10:15.
11:15.
Thank you, everybody. Or 11:15. Sorry, 11:15. Thank you.
11:15 Eastern. We'll be back with session number 3, DFARS to CMMC Interim Rule and Implementation with Perry Keating, Ed Bassett will be back, Timothy Trickett, and Christina Reynolds. So looking forward to that session. We'll be back 11:15, everybody. Thank you.
11:15. Thanks.
Christina and Tim for joining us on this panel. So, you know, one of the things that came out of the last panel was, you know, listen, got new rules, got new stuff to get started. So let's just take a step backwards, which is, you know, how do I know if I've gotten CUI? How do I know if I have FCI, and is it different from CUI? Could we give a couple examples? So Christina, we'll start with you, and then certainly the rest of the panel can step in there.
Sure. I think, you know, I've not only been hearing from subcontractors that have been past the DFARS 7012 clause on their subcontracts, but I've also been hearing from the prime contractors as well. And some of the prime contractors are asking me, how do I know when to pass this clause down? And it is interesting to note that in the DFARS 7012 clause, they say under Section M, subcontracts, the contractor shall include this clause, including this paragraph M, in subcontracts or similar contractual instruments for operationally critical support or for which subcontract performance will involve covered defense information, including some contracts for commercial items, without alteration except to identify the parties. The contractor shall determine if the information required for subcontractor performance retains its identity as covered defense information and will require protection under this clause, and if necessary, consult with the contracting officer. And 2, require subcontractors to notify the prime contractor or next higher tier subcontractor when submitting requests to vary from a Nist SP 800-171 security requirement to the contracting officer. And these are the 2 clauses that I kind of point out under the DFARS 7012 clause that basically says you have to flow it down, but if you want a variance from this clause, everything needs to be taken up to the contract officer. I've heard a lot about self-deleting clause. However, whether or not your prime says it's a self-deleting clause because you don't retain any CDI on your information systems, if they put that clause in your subcontract and you sign that subcontract, they have done their due diligence, right? They have flowed that subcontract clause down to you. That is their requirement. They're meeting it. Now you have to determine, and you may need to bring it not only to your prime, but your contracting officer over that work, whether or not you are in fact utilizing CDI or CUI on the contract. And you need to verify, and as we always say, get it in writing. You know, if they are issuing you some sort of variance, get it in writing from your contract officer.
Yeah, good. That's exciting. Ed, how do I know if I'm generating CUI? What would be some clues? What would be some things I'd look for if I'm generating? How do I know that I'm generating it?
So there's some good definitions of CUI on the National Archives website, NARA, that talks in quite a bit of detail about the kinds of information that are CUI. It's an umbrella term, right? So it's intended to encompass a lot of different information, which is the government has determined needs to be controlled. I mean, they're not going to release it to the public. They're going to control who has access to that. So, you know, I would say for starters, familiarize with those definitions of what is CUI, and then look at the kind of information that you're working with, the kind of information you're receiving, the kind of information you're generating, and see if it meets those definitions. And then back to Christina's point, talk to your primes, talk to your contracting officers to see if they agree with you, because I think that's you know, ultimately very important to make sure that there's not a disagreement or misunderstanding about what is. I think, you know, some people have said, is CUI always labeled? And, you know, to your point, Perry, if you're generating it, it's only labeled if you label it, right? So you have you have to be aware of what that data is. So understanding the kind of data that you're exchanging with your customers, with the government, with your primes, and the kind of data that you're generating, and really going through all that in detail, looking at anything that might be CUI based on reading those NARA published definitions. And again, they're very broad. They cover a lot of things, intentionally so. So if you have data that seems like it might fit in there, that's worth the conversation. I guess I'll also mention, you know, we've seen people struggling to get definitive answers on this. It might vary. You have different primes you're talking to on different projects. They might have different opinions. At the end of the day, each company is going to decide whether they need to have the capability to store and process CUI within their company, or they don't, right? If the nature of their services is such that they never have any CUI, and they have a very confident feeling that that's true today and will be true in the future, then you know, they don't necessarily need to implement controls on their information systems that would do that. I mean, it's a capability they don't need. On the other hand, if you're not sure if you might generate CUI in the past, present, or future, then you can't go wrong by putting some controls in place and having that as a capability of your company. So then you can say to your customers, well, I don't know exactly which of these things is CUI, but I'm capable of protecting it. If you give me some or I generate some, it will be in a protected system.
Right. Help me, I get asked the question a lot, the difference between CUI and FCI. How do I figure out which is in which bucket? Or could you give me some examples of some of them? Tim, are you still on? I think I've lost you on the thing. If you're still on, okay.
So with, you know, the real difference, FCI is kind of a weird middle ground. So on one side you have, you know, distribution A, completely unclassified, publicly releasable information. And then on the other side you have, you know, CUI. Right there in the middle between both of those is really where FCI lives. It's anything that's not for public release but isn't CUI. The FAR 52.204-21, the basic safeguarding requirements, actually just describes what FCI is, and it's basically that. It's just anything that is not intended for public release, and then also would not be considered CUI. So it could be information, contract information. It could be information on, you know, an award. It could be simple transactional type information, payment information. Really just it's anything that you don't want to be out there in the public but does not yet meet the threshold for CUI.
All right, good stuff. So if we moved on from that and we started to say right? We heard a lot of discussion in the previous session of sort of the compliance, right? So system security plan, technical boundary. Christina, let's help me with what's a technical boundary? What's a system security plan? How do I know I have a good one of those?
And that's a great question, because I've seen from contractor to contractor varying examples of what a system security planner or what they have built can become. I know for myself, I tend to take the strictest of definitions. A lot of it I gleaned actually from entering systems into EMAS multiple times, but really framing how you have safeguarded that information within the context of your infrastructure, but not just the infrastructure that contains digital data, but you need to also outline your physical security systems, your personnel, and how you train them, because that really ends up being from an overlayer of applying safeguarding. If you're not doing your due diligence first and foremost by training your personnel, that typically 9 times out of 10 is where an adversary is going to get in. So the system security plan really outlines all of this and should address, you should include in the appendices how you have not only approached each and every control, but how you have tested it. And I think that's something that's overlooked by a lot of people in their system security plan is they say they've implemented something and that's as far as they go. But really the onus is, how did you test it? How did you verify it? So they want to see that test methodology. And then in addition for CMMC, they're going to want to see 2 pieces of objective evidence attached per control. So when you think about the entirety of what a system security plan is going to have to do, really think in terms of those, how did you test that you have actually implemented it? What were your verification validation process steps? And make sure that you're collecting that evidence as you go along.
Yeah, it was a good point. I know in the previous session, they talked a little bit about having been auditors. It's one thing to say you do it. It's another to say I have evidence that proves that I can do it. So always good advice, because the person grading that doesn't know you do it, they're looking for the evidence. Ed, on the technical boundary, sometimes I sort of view CUI as the bouncing ball. Everywhere the CUI and the bouncing ball can go, that's sort of within my technical boundary. How do I figure out where my technical boundary, what's inside my boundary and what's outside my boundary?
Is the mantra that we hear from CMMC is follow the data, and I think that's it baked into their training and their messaging. So it is going to be about data flows and looking at, I was mentioning earlier about, understanding what is or might be CUI, what might be FCI, right, publicly releasable information. So understanding the kind of data that you work with, where it flows, and, then establishing boundaries. A lot of companies want to make the boundary of their CMMC certification smaller. It lowers the cost of implementing the requirements. It lowers the cost of the assessment. So there's some really good reasons to do that. And in order to do that, you have to have a reasonably good story about why the data doesn't flow into other places where it's not supposed to be. So if you're going to have an enclave where you're doing the CUI processing, you have to show some isolation of that enclave from the rest of your corporate systems that presumably don't rise to the level of CMMC level 3. So that exercise is, there's some traditional sort of segmentation, building virtual LANs, and putting things on different networks so they can't talk to each other. There's a user training perspective on that, of making sure people know which systems are authorized to use CUI and which ones are not, so they don't inadvertently put the sensitive data in the wrong place. Making sure that information is clearly identified. So there could be labeling, or it could be other instructions to your users so they know how to treat that data. So I think all that gets to establishing that boundary and making it something you can defend to an auditor. So to Christina's point about describing this in the SSP, that's the place to do that, to define that boundary, right? So before you get into the details of how you meet all the controls, having a section in there that says, this is my system, right? This is what I'm calling a system, and here is how I define the boundary between that system and the rest of the universe. and having, again, reasonable measures in place. So traditional network segmentation, firewall, looking at the traffic flow, all those kind of technical controls, but also the administrative controls around the data flows.
And I will add too, I think a good point to add on to what Ed was saying is when we talk about boundaries, we can't do that without some sort of data loss prevention system. So one thing that people are still starting to understand is how do I label that data within the metadata such that it does not go beyond that boundary. What are the technical processes that we need to implement, and a DLP system is going to be one of those really critical pieces that people need to implement if they are defining a clear and defined system boundary.
Yeah, comment too. I think I've seen people that are putting a lot of work into segmentation. If DoD work is a small piece of your business, and it would be unreasonable and expensive to have those controls apply to your entire corporate system because you only do a couple of contracts, it's 10% of your business. Segmentation makes a lot of sense. On the other hand, if you're a small business and 90% of your work is DoD work, don't segment, just secure things, bring your systems up to the standard. It's just you're going to spend more time and money on segmenting, and you're accepting more risk in that case than if you would apply the controls across all the systems in your company.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. I've told people many times that, there's nothing in the 800, 171 or CMMC that's bad for you, right? It's good hygiene, it's eat less, exercise more, get good sleep. It's all just good hygiene. None of it's gonna be bad for you.
You're not required to protect your company proprietary information, but if you're trying to figure out how to protect it, level 3 is a pretty reasonable bar. And again, the government's not telling you have to, but your company's success matters. So, choose wisely.
Absolutely.
And there's additionally another thing to discuss when we talk about these system boundaries is that there are some movements happening, and they really address this in the CMMC registered practitioner training as well, that some of the primes are establishing that environment on behalf of their subs. So, as we move forward, we may be addressing more of a thin client situation where the prime says, okay, you're performing this work, maybe you come on site and you're operating 100% out of their environment, which has been safeguarded for CUI, CDI. Maybe they provide a thin client to you to operate from within their environment, no matter where you are actually physically sitting. So I think we're going to be seeing a lot of movements where the primes have really addressed and identified that the subcontractors that they absolutely need to have on their contract may not have it within their means to create this environment for the data they would be utilizing under performance of the scope of work. So why not provide that enclave, that environment for them?
Right. So Tim, coming over to you, I know that in the previous session there was a November 30th, here it comes, and I have to turn in my score into SPRS. Now, I don't know if I was the only person that noticed that the DoD assessment methodology had the fortunate or unfortunate acronym of the damn score, but I just got the giggles whenever I thought about it. But Tim, what's the score? What's the DoD assessment methodology? Is there a place I can go find it? How do I compute one of those for my organization?
So there is. So the DoD assessment methodology score, they did release. There's a PDF that you can get. I think if I can pull it up and probably link it so that everyone can have it. But it's based on Nist 800-171A, which is the DoD's, the Nist, the self-assessment methodology guide. It's based on a point system. The worst score you can possibly get, I believe, is a -314. And then not everything is weighed the same. So there are a few items in there where you can get a partial credit out of a point value. Say if it's 5 would be the highest you could get. If you're if you have a partial implementation, then you can get a 3 or a 1. And the goal is to obviously get the highest score possible, to be compliant with everything. Anything that you're not doing, you subtract 5 points for everything that's non-compliant or something that lives on your POAM. And then if they're derived controls from requirements, then you're subtracting either 3 or 1 point, depending on how it's weighed in the scoring methodology.
Yeah. Negative score doesn't sound good to me. I mean, I'm not a DoD contracting officer, but I can't imagine if you had a negative big score that's probably not a good thing. There was some conversation we heard from two of the primes in the previous sessions. Oh, there we go. Thanks for pulling that up. In terms of the large contractors now starting to reach out to people. So, you know, they're demanding, hey, what's going on? Did you report your score? So what are we seeing in terms of what are the large tier 1 primes asking of the subs? What are they reporting to? What kind of things are they looking for, and why? So Christina, why don't we start with you on that one? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, so they're really kind of getting ahead of everything, really, and the assessments that the requests that I'm starting to see from my customers that's coming from their large primes is not just determining whether or not a score has been submitted to SPRS, but it's also starting to ask about their CMMC levels. Some have included CMMC certification levels, which I find very odd because we don't have that yet. That has not been implemented, as Katie just talked about. So, you know, I had to advise my customers that because they issued the word certification in there, you cannot say, while you might be compliant to CMMC level 2, you are certified to that maturity level. So be very cautious when you answer these. I think they're getting the cart a little bit before the horse, but what they're trying to do is start to align with these new DFARS regulations that have come out. We see the DFARS 252-204-7019 starting to lead the way into entering in those assessments by November 30th for any new contract modifications to be added, and then 7020 laying the framework for what kind of assessment are they going to mandate, whether it's a basic, medium, high. Right now, everybody's entering in that basic. But then that last one, the DFARS 7021, was issued, which is starting to lay, as Katie said, that crawl, walk, run approach that the CMMC-AB is taking. And so because that clause was issued, now the primes are starting to lay that framework for, so where are you? And I think it's good to note for contractors who have done their due diligence, right? And one of our friends on one of our forums likes to say their due diligence and their due care, that they have started to implement their DFARS 7012 NIST 800 171 requirements. Those overlap. So you should understand and have a good assessor that can be working with you to cross map those assessments such that you have a good semblance of where you are in terms of your CMMC compliance, even if you can't get certified.
Right. So Ed, there was we've turned in our score into SPRS, and we heard about basic versus medium versus a high assessment. Help me with that. What are the differences between them? When would I know that I would be getting a medium or a high? Can you give us some insights into that?
So the basic assessment, as Christina mentioned, is a self-assessment that everybody's going to be required to do under these new rules. So, you know, if you have a contract awarded after November 30th, then it will require you to have, you know, already done that basic assessment. The basic assessment is defined in the NIST 800-171 alpha, and it's a level of rigor, if you will, right? So the basic level of rigor means I've verified the controls are implemented and look for obvious errors. So there's not a lot of extensive testing involved, but you do have to have a reasonable basis of, you know, why do I believe this control has actually been implemented and is actually effective. If the DoD chooses to, they have this the DIBCAC, the DCMA has some auditors in the in the DIBCAC, Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assistance Center. I'm probably getting that wrong.
Yeah, right.
But, you know, Katie mentioned they have about 50 FTEs that are out doing audits. That is an audit selected by the government based on their, you know, criteria that they've not released. So Is it because you had a bad score or a good score, or because you're on highly sensitive work, or big or small, unknown. So kind of like the IRS audit, if you will, it's going to be a surprise when it happens to you, I suspect. But some percentage of the defense industrial base will be selected for either a medium or high assessment performed by government auditors. So not a self-assessment, obviously, in that case, and the level of rigor increases in terms of what they're looking for in that verification step.
Yeah. So Tim, back over to you on the scoring methodology. You talked about -5 points for some and -3. That seems pretty. It seems pretty putative in terms of a scoring system. Is there anything we should glean from, or is there any message we think we're getting from DoD, given that that's the sort of the way the scoring came up, and you could end up with a negative number pretty quick?
So the real goal with the scoring methodology is, and the whole point of CMMC, the DCMA DIBCAC teams, the scoring methodology is to help the DoD mitigate their risk of the DIB to themselves and basically everything we're doing. And to do that, we need metrics, we need data. It's got to be pulled from somewhere, and to do that, it's this is what the DoD has decided is the way to do that. And, using a POAM as a tool to help with security and compliance rather than just, continue to kick open items down the road and never do them. This gives the DoD a better insight into what the defense industrial base is doing. And then it also gives organizations in the supply chain a better idea of what they look like and how they compare with, being compliant to 800-171 or, CMMC level 3. So it's really just, it's a way to help you, POAM is a way to help you get funding from your CEO and your CFO. It's like, hey,
right.
if you want these items closed, I need money, people, I need resources to be able to do this. And until you give me those things, it's going to stay there, and it's going to sit in spurs like this. So, and that, that's really what this is all about, is, closing those items and mitigating the risk of the DIB to the DoD.
Yeah, no, great point. Great point in terms of that. So speaking of costs, is this an allowable cost? Should I be setting this up to track all this? Christina, if I was going to spend, if I got to go spend money, if I got to go spend a couple $1 million to encrypt and multi-factor and get all my stuff together, what are some thoughts in terms of allowable costs, how I should track them, things like that?
Right. And to start out with, because I've had conversations with contractors on both sides of the fence, the answer is it depends. It depends on what kind of contracts you have. If you have a cost reimbursable contract, you should be able to track these costs, and I would make sure that they're discrete per contract. So that's kind of a critical aspect of it. But also being able to track these costs such that they're within your ICE model. If you build an ICE model yearly and you report to DCAA, DCMA, because this is such a big target for the DoD, absolutely, if you have like a cost plus fixed fee, make sure you're tracking those, make sure they are being allocated. That is going to make a big difference. Now, the other side of the fence is we've got some customers that said, but I'm all time and materials. My answer to them is you should be tracking those costs. You should be including them in an allocation for your G&A within your time and materials. I mean, all those time and materials costs, they're still based upon your calculations. So make sure your calculations are being performed accurately to include the costs that you're expending within those time and materials contracts. Did I cover everything?
I think so, right? I mean, you can't report it and you can't ask the government to reimburse it if you don't keep track of it. So I think that's a great point. So Ed, if I thought about, this new interim final ruling IFR came out, what are the biggest challenges? What are the biggest surprises that sort of, because some people, it seems like it really caught them by surprise. Any sense of what the biggest challenges or the biggest surprises were that came out of that?
There's the requirement itself, I think, was a little bit of a surprise, right? I think everybody was very focused on CMMC, and
Yeah,
this
right.
has provided a real jump start to a five-year rollout, which is good. But it's enforcement of existing regulations. So in that sense, there's no surprises as far as new security controls. I'll talk about a couple of things I think are getting people's attention. But I saw a pretty interesting audience question come in on the chat window that relates to this. It says, so tell us what meets a control so we are not just wandering in the fog, right? So I think, that's number one. Is I think people are saying, hey, these requirements, yes, they've been out there, but maybe I thought I was compliant. Now that I'm actually having to score it, I'm rethinking that. I'm wondering if that's really true. And I would say, there has been a lot of confusion on interpretation of the Nist 171, and there's a few reasons for that. One is the wording is, sort of government speak for regulatory speak with not a lot of explanation, and there's not been a place to turn to for an authoritative answer. And as we look to CMMC, the CMMC standard is much better in terms of making it clear what the expectation is. So for each requirement, the requirement is stated, not much change from what's out there today in the Nist 171, but there's an explanation and examples given. And I would say that if what you're doing lines up with the explanation and the examples, you can have a pretty good amount of confidence. You need to make sure you can demonstrate that to an auditor under CMMC. So as Christina mentioned, 2 objective pieces of evidence. So I think as you're looking at the near-term requirement to report scores under Nist 171, it might be wise to pull out the CMMC standard and use that to help you decide if you're meeting Nist 171. Seems a little counterintuitive, but the CMMC standard is more modern. It does a better job of explaining what the government's expectations are, and you're going to need to meet it pretty soon anyway, right? So that will help you, I think, get a better handle on, are you in fact meeting the control or not? And I think if the answer is, I can't get it to line up with the explanation of the example, I can't really show it to an external party, then you're not going to be ready for CMMC, and you ought to seriously question whether you want to give yourself a positive score. The basic assessment you're doing now is a self-assessment, so you could be a little generous, but I would suggest don't be too generous. So what are hanging people up? So that's number one, is interpretation of the requirements, understanding what they're really supposed to do. So some confusion. And I think, again, there's some things we could do right now that will help clarify that. Scope and boundary, I think, is a challenge. Deciding what systems need to be protected and what don't. I think a lot of people have not given that the sort of formal thinking that they need to do. It is a requirement to determine it. It is a requirement to document that in your SSP. And under CMMC, you're going to have to present that to an auditor. So apply that scrutiny yourself. Does the story hold water? When you're calculating your score and you say, my system that you're reporting, do you have a good feel for exactly what's in and out of that system?
Yeah, no, great point. So a question from the audience, and I apologize, I probably wasn't paying as much attention to that as I should have. Somebody asked, is the DoD methodology document, the NIST 800-171 assessment methodology version 1.2.1 dated June 24th? I think that's the latest one that came out. If you Google that, if there's one after that, I don't think so, but I think that is the one. If you look in the appendix, it pretty clearly articulates each control and what the points are. So that was I think the question that we got from the participants. So hopefully we were able to answer that. You brought up the boundary and the markings, or the boundary, which I think is one. I do know that when we come in and do assessments for folks, one of the things that we tend to do is we tend to pull some data that we know is CUI. It's the actual technical design to the wing of a plane, or the actual technical design to some part of a submarine. And we see old markings, right? These are the old FOUO, the old, SBU or ITAR, stuff like that. So is it fair for me to think that CUI is now the new marking? DoD has come out with instructions on it, and that's the way we should be properly marking that information. Christina, you're nodding your head, so you probably got a thought on that.
Yes, and I think from my perspective, my job, your job, everybody sitting on this panel, one of the very first things we have to work with is, as I pointed out previously, is training personnel. And so what I'm seeing right now is a discrepancy in personnel who actually execute work on behalf of the contractor, understanding what FCI is, what CUI is, and how to properly not only mark, especially for the dissemination controls that we see. If you're used to secret dissemination controls, well, these look very similar to that. But what I'm not seeing is the companies actually organizing within their cybersecurity training what is CUI basis level of training. And there's a lot of ready-made available training out there. I'm starting to see it getting disseminated from some of our subcontractors that are trying to put that training into the hands of their employees, because that is first and foremost where we need to be orienting the training, is the personnel who are actually either processing or generating, transmitting, storing, receiving CUI, CDI, such that they know how to handle that. They know how to label it. They know what they're looking for. And there's lots of subcategories on the NARA site. So make sure that if somebody's working within a particular contract that deals with a certain subset category of information, they are familiar with those markings. And you know whose job that is? That is the job of the person, usually the program manager, that project level manager, the stakeholder of the company. Sometimes, there's only a few people at the top, and they need to take it upon themselves to train themselves first. What kind of data are we processing for this contract? And again, I say, go back and talk to your contract officer first and foremost. Go talk to that data owner. If you're getting data in order to process something on your contract, that data owner may have to tell you how that data has to be handled. The CIO, people of those ilk that need to be able to tell you what kind of data you're generating or processing, and then train everybody to label it and store it appropriately, almost as if it were classified data, because a lot of it looks very similar when you go through the CUI training.
So Perry, the early draft of CMC, there was a requirement in there to identify and label CUI, and that was removed from the final standard for all kinds of reasons, I'm sure. But labeling is inconsistent, as you mentioned, right? You see stuff with old labels, maybe no labels. I think the smell test is important. If it looks or it smells like CUI, it probably is. The easy question to ask yourself is, would it be okay with everybody if I put this on my website? Right? Yeah, right. Because Tim mentioned earlier, we have publicly releasable information. We have FCI, we have CUI. So if it's not publicly releasable, it needs to be protected. And yes, there's some nuance about how exactly you need to protect it, but it's not going to be a problem if you protect it a little bit too much. No, I don't think you're going to yell at for that. But any data that you have in your possession that you think would not be appropriate to publish on your website should be on a system that is adequately protecting that data.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. So Tim, if I circle back to you, and I think, wow, these are a lot, right? I got a FAR 52204, I got a Nist 800, now I got a CMMC. What's the best? How do I get the best bang for my dollar, right? Is this really 3 assessments every year? I mean, that seems like a lot. I spent a lot of time in banking, and they have a whole group that's all they do is get assessed by their regulators. How do I get the best bang for my dollar? What's a good way for me to think about how to approach this?
So if you've already got the DFARS 7012 rule in your contracts, then you've already got to comply with 800-171. CMMC level 3 is not that far off. It's just 20 additional requirements. So right now that's 800-171, and the DFARS 7012 clause is still the current rule, current law. So if you start there, and do what you can. Obviously SPRS kind of ties into that. And we are still waiting on the DoD to release reciprocity information for, let's say I have ISO 27000, or I've got a FedRAMP, moderate or high, ATO. All these things are still to be determined on how that's all going to tie in together with reciprocity on the various different, compliance models out there. But for right now, everyone has the, the 800-171 requirements, which will be closely in line with CMMC level 3. So, starting there and keeping track of what you're doing and how you're progressing, and then, jumping from 800-171 compliance to CMMC level 3 compliance, adding those additional 20 items is not that big of an uplift. A lot of it is policy driven. It's not really anything you've got to go out and buy new technology to implement. So,
Right.
That's really where you want to start.
Yeah, no, excellent point. We were fortunate or unfortunate enough to have some folks that went through some of the pilot DIBCAT assessments, and the process maturity was an item that came up a lot in terms of, it's one thing that has a policy that says I do that. It's another that says, I'm going to continue to do it. It's institutionalized, it's systematic, it goes on a regular basis, and I can produce a lot of evidence. Really seem to be an area on the policy side for folks to take a look at. So if I'm watching Mickey here, I got 11:56, so we've got a couple of minutes before we come to our end, and I want to make sure I appropriately thank Christina, Ed, and Tim for a really spectacular job. But were there any questions? I'm trying to look through the chat here and see if there was anything I was missing that we should have made sure we've addressed. We didn't. Some discussion about blueprint drawings. And that's going to be probably a little into it. So any other questions or last thoughts from our panelists as we start to think about successfully bringing this session to a close?
Yeah, Perry, I think I'd like to just do one last thought, because I think right at the end there, you hit on something that I view as absolutely critical, which is discussion of, just as a last point, what those maturity levels mean in addition to the overall controls that you implement. And I like to put it as simple as possible to have people understand. To get to maturity level 2, you need to have documented your processes. So if you establish your artifacts, you establish your policies, and you document it, and very importantly, you date it and sign it, and then write it to a PDF where nobody can edit it past that point, you have that control set of paperwork, right? The CMMC will call that documented as your maturity level. So that's what those additional maturity levels mean. But to get to CMMC level 3, they call that managed. So again, just adding to your point, Perry, which I think was a great way to finish this, make sure that the management section means that, okay, last year we created our policies for the first time, but this year we went through all of our policies. We tested our disaster recovery plan. We tested our COOP plan. We tested our contingency plan. You're going through and testing your incident response plan. And we validated that everything that we wrote last year is still good this year. And you, again, you generate a new set, you add, any modifications to your sets of policies, templates, you have your ISSO or your stakeholder or your VP or your president sign it, you write it to PDF. Now you have a controlled set of documentation from last year, you have this year's, and you can show any auditor that not only are you performing maturity level 2 documentation, you're performing maturity level 3 management.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant point. I think we were in one of the DIBCATs and somebody said, showing me your incident response plan from 2018 is not that helpful, which I thought was a little bit smart aleck of the assessor to say, but I think they were trying to make the point. So I've got 11:59 on my Mickey Mouse watch here. So listen, I'd really like to thank Christina and Ed and Tim for being such a spectacular panel. Hopefully folks found some interesting nuggets in there. Please reach out to us if you had any questions. And Todd, I think I send it back to you in the studio, don't I?
Yes, you do. Thank you very much. Before we close out for lunch here at the 1 hour break, I wanted to launch another polling question. This one is more of a great question on whether or not you feel more optimistic about 2021 than you did at 2020. So let me launch that polling question. And from a business perspective, are you more optimistic or less
I'm
optimistic?
glad you included that as it relates to your business objectives.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I could have said in general, but I wanted to be a little more specific and see what people's opinions are on this. Yeah, I'll give you another 10 seconds to put your answer in. All right, I'll close the poll. Thank you for everyone that did vote. And show the results. We got a lot of optimistic, at least more than I was thinking it would be. That's great. So I'm glad to see that we're all optimistic people going into 2021. All right. With that, thank you again, Ed, Perry, for managing that, Christina, and Tim. So we're real excited for Tim to come back this afternoon. I think let me just move ahead here for real quick to look at what we have next. 1 o'clock, we'll do a technology fireside chat with Ed Bassett, Tim Trickett, and Christina Reynolds. We're coming back for 15 minutes before we get into some more of our program. So please be back at 1 p.m. Make sure you use the new link that you received for the PM session of this cybersecurity, and we'll see you at that time. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you all very much.